Today, we have a deeply troubling case that spans more than 4 decades and culminates in the longest period of wrongful incarceration for a woman in U.S. history. This is the story of Sandra Hemme, who served 43 years in prison for a crime she did not commit. On December 3rd, 2024, Sandra's case was finally dismissed. But how did a mentally ill 20-year-old get entangled in a murder she never committed? Why was critical evidence ignored? And who actually killed 31-year-old library secretary Patricia Jeschke all those years ago in St. Joseph, Missouri? Stay with us as we revisit the crime scene, the investigations, the interrogations, and the eventual exoneration that rocked the community and questioned the very foundations of our criminal justice system. It's November 13th, 1980. In a quiet apartment on the east side of St. Joseph, Missouri, 31-year-old Patricia Jeschke fails to show up to work at the local public library. Concerned coworkers call her mother, Helen McLaughlin. Her mother rushes to her daughter's apartment and finds every parent's worst nightmare. Patricia's body is discovered in her bedroom. She's been beaten, stabbed in the head, and strangled with pantyhose. Her hands are bound behind her back with a telephone cord, and there are 2 lengths of cut antenna wire lying nearby. News of the violent crime spreads quickly, and the local newspapers publish front-page coverage. Photographs of the crime scene, complete with intimate details, circulate in the media. Within days, the St. Joseph police investigate every angle. Witnesses mention a white pickup truck spotted near Patricia's apartment. Black hairs are found in the bedroom. There's little physical evidence to go on, and the town is gripped by fear and speculation. Who would do such a terrible thing to a woman who seemed to have no enemies? On November 25th, 1980, Nurse Ellie McBain calls the police, frightened. A former patient is in her house, holding a knife and refusing to leave. When the police arrive, they find 20-year-old Sandra Hemme hiding in a closet. Sandra is taken to St. Joseph State Hospital on a 96-hour police hold. Sandra has a history of mental illness and has been in and out of psychiatric facilities, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes not. Her latest stay began on November 7th, just days before Patricia's murder. She was discharged against medical advice the very afternoon Patricia was last seen alive. During her initial interviews with Detective Stephen Fuston, Sandra's statements are vague and contradictory. She thinks she may have gotten high with Patricia, but she isn't sure. She's not confident in her memory. She's in and out of lucidity, often citing her spacey mental state. Yet within days, as the police press her for more details, Sandra's story begins to evolve and incriminate. She mentions a man named Joseph Joe Wobski, describing how he supposedly killed Patricia while Sandra waited outside. She says Wobski had blood on his shirt when he returned to the car. Police immediately arrest Wobski on capital murder charges. But soon, they uncover a massive alibi problem. Wobski was in a locked detox facility at the time of Patricia's death, making it impossible for him to have committed the crime. Faced with that new information, Sandra's story changes again. By December 10th, 1980, she confesses to killing Patricia alone. In her statement, she claims she lost it and strangled Patricia with pantyhose after confronting her in the hallway. The police and the public are stunned and believe they have their killer. But things aren't adding up. Even as Sandra is confessing, new evidence emerges. Patricia's credit card was used the day after her murder in Kansas City by a man claiming to be a police officer, a man named Michael Holman, an actual officer of the St. Joseph Police Department. Holman tries to explain away the credit card by claiming he found Patricia's purse in a ditch after having an affair in a motel across from her apartment. Investigators quickly poke holes in that story. Holman can't provide reliable details about the alleged mistress or produce evidence that he was even at the motel. To complicate matters further, Holman's own wife has no idea where 2 jewelry boxes in their home came from, jewelry that Patricia's father identifies as belonging to his daughter. Despite these obvious red flags, the investigation into Holman fizzles. Meanwhile, Sandra, in a fragile state of mental health, is left to face the consequences of her ever-shifting confessions alone. By early 1981, Sandra has pleaded guilty to capital murder to avoid the death penalty. But her plea is a tapestry of contradictions. She can't recall how she and Patricia reconnected on the day of the murder. She claims she didn't realize she'd committed the crime until reading about it in the newspaper. She vaguely references a graduation photo on the wall, a cat, and other details that either didn't exist or were widely reported in the press. Still, the judge accepts her plea on the second try and sentences her to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 50 years. In the meantime, Michael Holman pleads guilty to insurance fraud involving his white Ford pickup, but manages to secure a sweetheart deal with no further charges, even though that truck had been seen near Patricia's apartment on the night of the murder. Sandra attempts to withdraw her guilty plea, citing her attorney's failure to investigate her competency. The courts grant her a new trial, but she remains in custody. At that second trial in 1985, prosecutor Patrick Robb and defense attorney Robert Duncan stipulate some evidence tying Holman's hair to the crime scene. However, they stop short of painting a full picture of his involvement. Sandra is convicted again. The appellate court upholds that verdict, and she sinks into the bleak reality of prison life, serving out a life sentence for a murder she swears she didn't commit. Decades pass. Sandra's mental health worsens. She's convicted of separate offenses involving prison guards. Then, around 2006, a new medication helps stabilize her mental health, and she begins reaching out to innocence organizations for help. Finally, the Innocence Project in New York takes interest in her case. They discover the physical evidence from 1980 has been destroyed, halting DNA testing. Yet they persist, gathering records, interviewing witnesses, and piecing together the puzzle. They learn about FBI reports showing a partial palm print on the antenna wire that excluded Sandra and Patricia, but not Holman. Hairs found on the bed, initially said to match Holman's, but that information was buried. Playgirl magazine recovered from Sandra's home, which bore her prints, but none from Patricia, contradicting the official narrative that Sandra took it from the crime scene. When the legal team files a habeas petition in 2023, they expose a shocking pattern of suppression by the St. Joseph Police Department and the prosecution. Evidence pointing squarely toward Holman was either ignored or never disclosed. Expert witnesses testify. Sandra's statements were the product of a mentally ill woman in crisis, repeatedly interrogated and fed details through newspapers, detectives, and open conversations in the community. Psychiatrist Dr. Judith Edersheim testifies that Sandra's mental fragility left her vulnerable, malleable, and seeking attention and approval at any cost. After a marathon evidentiary hearing in January 2024, Judge Ryan Horseman rules in Sandra's favor, stating that the previously hidden evidence regarding Michael Holman was material to her defense. The judge also criticizes Sandra's trial attorney for failing to adequately present evidence of her mental illness and how it could lead to a false confession. Still, the state appeals. Attorney General Andrew Bailey tries to keep Sandra behind bars. But by July 19, 2024, after 43 painful years, Sandra is finally released from prison when courts refuse to block her freedom. In October 2024, the Missouri Court of Appeals upholds Judge Horseman's ruling, pointing out that the state's attempt to claim it was ambushed by exculpatory evidence is borderline absurd. Prosecutors are given 10 days to say whether they'll retry Sandra. They miss the deadline, and on December 3, 2024, Sandra's unconditional release is signed. Over 4 decades after a brutal murder rocked St. Joseph, Missouri, Sandra Hemme walks free, exonerated at last. The identity of Patricia Jeschke's killer remains officially unsolved. But for many watching from the sidelines, evidence points strongly to Michael Holman, a man who escaped serious scrutiny for reasons we'll never fully know. For Sandra, a life stolen can never be restored. Her attorneys say her mental health deteriorated for years in prison, a place woefully unprepared to provide the care she needed. Only in recent years did new medication and the efforts of dedicated advocates crack open her case. The sadness of Patricia's murder remains, as does the question: why did the system focus so intently on a vulnerable suspect with severe mental illness, while a police officer with suspicious ties went free? We may never have all the answers, but we do know this: Missourians and all Americans must reckon with a justice system that can so devastatingly fail the innocent. Wrongful convictions destroy lives, families, and communities. Patricia Jeschke lost her future, and for 43 years, Sandra Hemme lost hers too.